We all want to be witches and wizards so that we can go to Hogwarts and learn magic and play Quidditch, right? But what about after Hogwarts, when you go off to work? What do you think your life would be like when you graduate? Because honestly, it feels to me like 75% of wizards and witches either work at the Ministry, teach, or don't work at all. So I thought today I would rank a bunch of jobs from the wizarding world in terms of how fun they'd be and how much I'd like them as a career if I were in the Harry Potter universe. So if I ranked every single job I could think of from the wizarding world, it would be like a 47-hour video. So instead, we're going to go to the Pottermore page specifically about wizarding careers. They start off with Aurors, a job where you work for the Ministry, hunting down and trying to imprison dark wizards and witches. And they describe being an Auror as the coolest job in the wizarding world. Is it? Okay, lots of dueling, lots of epic fights and battles, slaying dark wizards. It sounds cool, but look, I'm a little bit older than I was when I first read the series, so forgive me if I got boring. But that sounds like a whole lot of putting yourself in danger to me. Hunting down dark wizards and witches like Bellatrix Lestrange, the threat of unforgivable curses being fired at you time and time again. I don't know if that sounds like a good time to me. That said, I'm sure it is very rewarding, you know, taking the most dangerous wizards and witches off the street, genuinely helping to make the world a better and safer place. But the threat of being maimed or injured or, Merlin forbid, killed, that really knocks it down a tier or two for me. So I think being an Auror, we are going to put this in B tier. It sounds cool, it's worthwhile, just way too much danger for me. So one of the most common jobs that we see adults in the Harry Potter series working is jobs within the Ministry of Magic. That includes Aurors, sure, but I'm talking more about how most of them seem to be doing like paperwork and planning and organising. They seem to be the Leslie Nopes of the wizarding world, right? Which, by the way, a sitcom following people working at the Ministry of Magic in the style of The Office or Parks and Rec is an incredible idea for a TV show. And if HBO Max or if Netflix buys HBO and they're trying to think of spin-offs, that is one I would watch. So working for the Ministry feels like you could genuinely make a difference, right? You could work on wizard and muggle relationships, or work to improve the way that the wizarding world sees like werewolves and centaurs and things. So it's got the whole making the world a better place like an Auror does, but without the threat of death and danger constantly. Of course, you might also get the Percy Weasley treatment and be forced to write reports about the thickness of cauldron bottoms. But generally, I reckon working in the Department of Magical Sports or Magical Creatures, or even in the Department of Mysteries, so many of those departments sound fun and cool and interesting and like you can make a difference without danger. Plus, I know a few people who work for my local council, right? And it seems like in government jobs, it's fairly easy to move sideways into different departments. So if I work for the Ministry and I could hop about every few years and get a taste for other departments until I've basically sampled the entirety of the Ministry, I don't think I'm going to ever get bored. It sounds really cool. That said, there is the whole corruption, propaganda, working with people like Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge, busybodies and Jobsworths taking themselves very seriously, career politicians, slimy people like Lucius Malfoy trying to like lobby them for their own selfish gain. There are plenty of downsides. But after the series wraps up and like Kingsley becomes the Minister, or later on down the line when Hermione becomes Minister, I reckon that'll be much better. Hopefully they'd have got rid of a lot of that bad stuff. And if that's when I was working there, then I think I would put this in the A tier. And while we're talking about working, I've had a few jobs in my time and a ton of work setups, right? And nothing makes a job worse than a bad work setup. Like bad desks that you have to slump over, uncomfortable chairs. And then I got a standing desk, and it genuinely felt like I had something magical to help me focus and do my best work. Like if I'm feeling a bit restless or distracted, I can swap from sitting to standing to help freshen me up and stop my back from aching. Equally, if I need to take it easy for the afternoon, I can go back to sitting and just take a load off. So I'm lucky enough to have this FlexiSpot desk that I love, but my fiance setup isn't as great, and she's constantly complaining about back problems and wrist pain and neck ache. So I reached out to my friends at FlexiSpot to see if they could help out, and they were kind enough to send a brand new standing desk and chair with lumbar support so I could redo Danny's office area. Because here's the thing, when COVID hit, this was our guest bedroom, and it wasn't supposed to be an office. So we just grabbed the cheapest IKEA desk and chair we could find and made do. But now, with this new FlexiSpot E7 Pro and FlexiSpot C7 chair with lumbar support, we can make Danny's work setup so much more comfortable for her. Like, we don't need anything crazy aesthetically, just something sleek, minimal, where she can feel her best while she works. They're so easy to put together, the instructions are super simple to follow, and now, look at this. The desk is perfect for switching from sitting to standing. And speaking of back pain, look at the support this chair is giving her. Definitely better than what she had before. It has memory settings to save what height you want the desk at for standing and sitting and other custom heights. Plus you can charge your phone off it as well. If you want to level up your office setup, whether that's a chair with more lumbar support or a sleek standing desk, check out FlexiSpot.uk, and thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Now that's sorted, let's get back to the magical jobs. So the next most common job in the wizarding world besides working for the ministry seems to be teaching at Hogwarts. It's also, apparently, where the most gifted witches and wizards end up, so much for the old saying, those who can't do teach. McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, Dumbledore, these are some extremely talented wizards and witches, arguably in the top 10 most talented of their generation, based on every character we meet in the series, and given there's a war going on, we meet quite a lot of the biggest and the best. And the ones I mentioned, McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, Dumbledore, are all incredible, and they all end up teaching at Hogwarts. So, if you taught as a job, you would at least be surrounded by brilliant colleagues. That said, there is the obvious elephant in the room. Hogwarts is not a safe place to work, and I'm not just talking about if you're Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. In general, trolls seem to roam around the castle, basilisks attempting murder multiple times in a year, dementors trying to suck the souls out of children, tournaments where people die, not just children in Cedric, but ministry officials who come to visit, the torture of children from corrupt government officials, the death of a headmaster, and a giant war. Doesn't exactly sound like a peaceful job where you can just count down the days until retirement, does it? That said, there is obviously something about Hogwarts, right? The magic of the place, the moving staircases. Although, if I was having a bad day at the office, my kids maybe that I was teaching were a nightmare. They didn't focus, they didn't listen. And I just wanted to take a break, get a coffee, have a stroll around the grounds in the sunshine. And I had to worry about the damn staircases moving. Some that have a trick step that you can get stuck in. And this god-awful poltergeist whose sole existence is just to go around irritating people. I'm not going to find it easy to relax and unwind after a trying day. So I think in general, this has to be a C-tier job. The danger, the lack of peace and quiet. Also, they don't seem to have much downtime as teachers. They're constantly like patrolling the halls at night. I don't know if that's what it's normally like at boarding schools. Teachers are just constantly working round the clock. But this is a C-tier job. I don't like kids that much. It was never going to be that high. So look, there is nothing more valuable and worthwhile than helping the sick and needy, right? Doctors, nurses, I take my hat off to you, or I would if I was wearing one. So working at St. Mungo's, or in a hospital wing in the wizarding world, or generally being a healer, just as important, just as worthwhile. If these weren't fictional characters, I would pat them on the back. I appreciate the work they're doing. That said, I would worry if I were in that career that being around the sick and injured in a magical environment poses significantly more risk to the healthcare practitioners than it would in like normal healthcare in the real world. What I mean by that is, it seems like there's always new spells and potions that could just crop up, right? Change the game. Potentially make the way you'd usually heal somebody obsolete or more complicated. Like Arthur's wound in the Order of the Phoenix. They try how they'd normally heal a wound like that, but because it's like such dark magic, just doesn't seem to work. There's too many moving parts. Not to mention like people like Gilderoy Lockhart, right? Remember when he complicates Harry's broken arm after his Quidditch game? By taking all the bones out? You think there aren't tons of incompetent witches and wizards out there who think they can just quickly fix something, but instead end up making it worse and much harder to treat? Plus, this might be diving too deeply, but in our world, there is like scientific reason as to why things happen in your body. If you're throwing up or you have a fever, you might have a bacterial infection or something. If you're showing certain symptoms, there's a good chance your body is doing something so you can reverse engineer it with science to heal and treat that. I think. I'm not a doctor. I assume that's what science is for, right? I dropped biology quite early and I very nearly failed physics and chemistry, so I'm not much of a scientist. But things in healthcare seem like they should make sense logically in some way, right? But in the wizarding world, surely there's any number of things that can cause any number of symptoms that can also change in any number of ways based on any number of other things. Like when Madame Pomfrey fixes Hermione's teeth, there's any number of reasons why teeth might be big. They might naturally be that big. She might have messed up Apologies potion like she did in the Chamber of Secrets, and so her teeth just sort of got stuck. Someone might have used Engorgio on her teeth. It might be a joke product gone wrong. We see lots of Weasley Wizard Wheezes products that do things like make your tongue bigger, so you could probably do something to make the teeth bigger. Or it could be the curse that Malfoy actually used. And Hermione's teeth getting bigger is a relatively not life or death situation in which she is not unconscious. But imagine a witch or a wizard comes in unconscious with life-threatening illness symptoms, and you have to figure out why those things are happening. It could be any number of things. Plus, like in the Order of the Phoenix, when a deadly plant killed Broderick Bode, but people thought it was just a nice gift, that plant. There's too many things going on for me to think this is not a stressful job. Like living in a world where every single person has a wand with which they do everything. They cook with it, they clean with it, they transfigure and summon things with it, but they also fight and curse with it, and kids have them too. Like, don't even get me started on how many accidents there probably are to contest with, because everyone has one of these things, with infinite possibilities for what it can do. Plus potions and creatures and plants. It's too much. It's too much. A healer's work would just never be done. It would be so complicated. It would be too easy to get it wrong and mess things up when you have potentially a person's life in your hands. It's stressing me out just thinking about it. I can't cope with that kind of pressure. So if we're ranking things on how much I would want to do it, it would be like D tier. If it's how important and commendable it is, it's God tier. So I think we have to settle in the middle with like B tier. But just from how stressed out I am thinking about the ins and outs of that career, I want to put it in F. It can stay in B, but I just know I want to put it in F. So wandmakers sound quite cool, right? The quiet sort of mix between art and science. The way that like different woods and cores impact different things for the wand, and how they then speak to different kinds of wizards and witches based on those combinations. It's really cool and interesting, I think. If you watched my video where I ranked all of the subjects that you can learn at Hogwarts, I said something similar about ancient runes. Like, there just seems to be so much deep and mystical magic that there is to find and discover, and that's so interesting. I said it about ancient runes, and I feel the same about like wand lore, you know? Like every wand is kind of its own masterpiece of like a sculpture, but also a science with how everything fits and works together. But then also a puzzle to be solved too, in finding out like who will be chosen by that wand. It sounds really cool, but also kind of lonely. Like, Mr. Ollivander is a bit strange at times. The way he tells Harry, a kid who is only an orphan because Voldemort killed his parents, the way Ollivander then tells him at 11 years old,
"He who must not be named did great things."
Like, I know he didn't mean great as in good, he meant like great as in big. But still, the kid is 11. Read the room, have a bit of tact, and be a bit sensitive, okay? Maybe don't have one of the first few things you say to him be about his dead parents and the person who killed them. I don't like telling people how to do their job, but I feel like that's the basics, right? So I just wonder if being alone with his wands most of the time, solving those puzzles and crafting those pieces, I wonder if it sent him a bit kooky. Like, we know he bonded a lot with Luna when he was captive in Malfoy Manor with her, and Lord knows she's quite kooky too. Maybe that's the common ground that they found, just being kooky and unhinged together, saying things without really thinking. Anyway, I think wand making is probably quite an isolating job, right? I can't imagine business is terribly busy either. Like, presumably most witches and wizards have one wand for their whole life. Like, I know sometimes they break and they need replacing, and sometimes they're handed down in families, meaning people buy replacements eventually. But mostly I imagine you get a wand to a kid aged 11 and they keep it forever. So like, business is busy in July and August leading up to the new school year, then what? For 10 months. The odd customer here and there? I guess that's when you'd go out and like collect your materials and like do your research on wand lore and actually create the wands themselves. But I don't know. Part of me thinks that this sounds really interesting and of course rewarding, obviously, like arming the next generation of wizard. And eventually, when you've been doing it for long enough, basically arming every witch and wizard in Britain if you're Ollivander. But it also sounds like slow and kind of repetitive and probably not terribly profitable either. Lonely at times as well. I think this is maybe a C tier job. So Bill Weasley seems to be, if I'm not mistaken, the only curse breaker that we know about in the wizarding world. What that means, the books aren't terribly clear. He works in Gringotts, sometimes with goblins, and presumably breaks curses. So whether like Gringotts has secondary business besides just storing the money of the wizarding families across Britain, and maybe it takes in cursed items and artifacts and uncurses them, breaks the curses with people like Bill Weasley. Who knows? Or maybe it's like the wizarding equivalent of like anti-money laundering, right? Like how might you illegally make yourself richer in the wizarding world? You might make your gold duplicate or move other people's gold into your vault by means of nefarious magic. Stuff like that. Maybe that's what Bill stops from happening. Or maybe it's like, you know, in cybersecurity, they sometimes pay hackers to try and hack in so they can see where their flaws are. Maybe that's what Bill does. He tries constantly to break into Gringotts to break their protective charms, they're not really curses, and in turn they can find the flaws and protect it more. I don't really know. It's not a lot to go on. It sounds cool, whatever it is, so we'll just go middle of the road. We'll go B tier for this one. Okay, I'm going to be a bit biased because I grew up wanting to be a writer in the real world. So the idea of being a writer in the wizarding world sounds equally incredible. Although, you know in The Goblet of Fire how Rita Skeeter has her quick quotes quill that kind of writes things for her, even not in her specific words? It does make me think a little bit about like generative AI and how there are probably ways to be a writer in the wizarding world without actually writing your own words yourself, you know? But there are other kinds of writer, right? There's a journalist, not in the style of Rita Skeeter, but like actual investigative journalism, right? Traveling the wizarding world and writing hard-hitting magical pieces about corruption and historical artifacts or big foreign affairs in overseas wizarding communities. It sounds incredible, right? The things you'd see, how much you'd travel, and you'd get to write about it all. Or writing books, right? Imagine if Gilderoy Lockhart wrote fiction instead of just being a fraud and pretending it was his life. His stories were obviously interesting and compelling and exciting. We know that Ron read magical comic books growing up, and he also had stories read to him by Molly. So just like writing fiction and traveling the wizarding world to explore settings and ideas for plots. Or even non-fiction, right? This is in a world with unicorns and potions and witches and trolls. The non-fiction is probably every bit as compelling as the fiction would be, if not more so, because it's real. Maybe that's why Lockhart had to lie, because adults don't really care for fiction in the wizarding world, because life is just close enough to fantasy. I just think being a writer in the wizarding world would be the coolest job. Like, I recognize my bias, but seeing and learning about the wizarding world as much as possible would be great. No threat of danger either. You could take writing retreats all over the world, and like traveling costs aren't a thing because of the Flu Network and portkeys and stuff. It's god tier. It's perfect. I can't think of a better job. There are a few different ways that being a landlord of a pub in the wizarding world could go. So you have the 3 broomsticks with Madame Rosmerta, right? And that sounds amazing. It's warm, it's welcoming, you get all the gossip from ministry officials and the people at Hogwarts. Similar to how Rosmerta is part of the conversation about like Sirius and the Potters and Peter in The Prisoner of Azkaban. And then on top of that, you get to live in a quaint little village with thatched roof cottages. From what we read about in the story, there doesn't often seem to be like bar brawls or anything either. Just like cute school trips every few months, the odd visit from like Dumbledore or Hagrid. That side of being a barkeep sounds great, but also it could be the Hog's Head just down the road, which is dark and dingy and scary with questionable clientele who probably do get into brawls. So like, I think if it were a nice pub, and if I were a landlord, I'd try to do like community events to make sure it was a nice pub. So like open mic nights, comedy nights, pub quizzes. I think it would be a pretty top tier job if that were the case. Like, I was a bartender for a few years in my late teens and my early 20s. And despite being an introvert, I didn't mind making like small talk while I served drinks. I worked in one bar where I'd maybe be on like an 8 to 10 hour shift, and I'd serve like maybe 5 people the whole time. So we'd chat a bit when they came in, but I'd also have a book behind the bar that I could just sit and read. I could put whatever music I wanted on. Like, imagine that, but just by Hogwarts with magic. I think that sounds pretty incredible. I think this is an A tier job, so long as it's the right kind of pub. Like, I don't want it to be the hangout for the Death Eaters, you know? Okay, obviously being a professional athlete is going to be pretty great. Fame, fortune, playing a sport that you love to pay the bills, sponsorships from your favorite brands. Like, I'm a big sports boy, okay, so this sounds pretty great to me. And there doesn't seem to be too much of a broad Quidditch setup either, so if you're playing professionally, you're probably doing pretty well, skill-wise and financially. It's not like in football in real life where you can be like semi-pro and still have to like work other jobs too, from what I can tell. Like, I don't think there's any of that in Quidditch. So yeah, I don't think there's too much more to say. Like, if I could be a professional football player, I would take that in a heartbeat, and this is just the Wizarding World equivalent, right? Although, actually, the injuries do sound much more horrific. Like, Harry gets his arm broken, his skull cracked, he falls like 100 feet off his broom. There's a rogue bludger coming after him, his broom gets cursed to try and throw him off. There are specifically mechanics in Quidditch with the bludgers designed to cause pain. So I guess there are drawbacks that I didn't really think about to begin with. I was like blinded by the glitz and glamour of professional Quidditch, but I guess the reality could be a bit more brutal. There are 700 different kinds of fouls, like that's pretty intense. Matches that can last for days. Okay, I was close to putting this in God tier, but now I think about it a bit more deeply. Does it go down as far as B tier? I don't know, you're probably well compensated for the risks involved. Healers are pretty good, so even if you do get hurt, they can probably bring you back to full health pretty quickly and pretty painlessly. I think this goes in A tier. So much like being a bartender, this probably depends on what shop you run. Like, mostly the shopkeepers in the series seem to love their jobs, right? They seem happy, they seem fulfilled. Like, Florian Fortescue seems pretty jolly, if I'm remembering The Prisoner of Azkaban correctly. But there is the person in Flourish and Blotts who is overwhelmed by the Monster Book of Monsters trying to bite their hand constantly, and for months they probably have to be trying to get those dangerous books to give to Hogwarts students. Thanks, Hagrid. And I imagine, based on when Harry visits the restricted section of the library, there are actually lots of books that might be quite dangerous to be around. But like an ice cream parlor, a joke shop, a sweet shop, that all sounds pretty cool. Bringing people joy, seeing them smile, experimenting with the jokes or the flavors of whatever you're selling. Like, if I was a shopkeeper, what kind of shop would it be? Like, I don't think I'm creative enough for, like, joke items. Oh, I would be a wizarding travel agent. That's what I'd do. Like, getting to travel the world to research destinations for people to visit for holidays and work trips, then having meetings with them to discuss the amazing things that they can see in the wizarding societies across the globe. Like, advising if it's best for them to go by apparition or by flu or portkey, or trying to blend in with muggles on planes. That actually sounds so fun. If I can be a wizard travel agent, I'm gonna put this in God tier. So the final job on the Pottermore list is Charlie Weasley's job working with dragons. And like, I guess this is kind of just an extreme version of being a magizoologist, like Newt Scamander is in Fantastic Beasts, right? Going around, learning about, documenting magical creatures. It sounds pretty amazing. Exploring the world, surrounded by like hippogriffs and unicorns and incredible things that your mind can't even comprehend. They're majestic, they're interesting. They're probably also dangerous. Lots of dangers. And if you can tell from what I've said in this video so far, I'm not big on danger. Like, dragons might breathe fire at you, or eat you, or sting you with their horntails. So I think this is cool in theory, and it's cool to say that you work with dragons, but in general, I feel like there's a higher risk of death than there is a reward for doing this work. So I think we're going to put this in D tier. As cool as it sounds, the risks just outweigh the upsides for me. Let me know down in the comments what job you would want from this list. And if you want to see me rank a bunch of cool magical items from the Wizarding World, the Invisibility Cloak, the Marauder's Map, you can check out this video next.